Hello and welcome back, friends, to another episode of Lynch Paints, where today Lynch is going to be wandering into Nurgle's garden, that pus-filled, smelly, fly-ridden, putrid place, and painting up a plague marine. Yeah, something very different. So, hope that you enjoy. If you're new, hello and welcome. If you want to just hit that little subscribe button down below, just to grow the small channel of mine, that'd be hugely appreciated. And if you do end up liking this, comment down below which part was your favourite, share it with your friends, and all that lovely good stuff that just makes me smile. So, without further ado, let's grab our paints, paintbrushes, and whatever pus-filled disease things you might be carrying, and let's dive straight into it. But of course, before we get started, we're going to need a selection of paints, and it is quite a wide selection of paints as well. There's quite a few technical paints in there just to add to your collection. So, alongside of which, we're going to need a medium-sized brush. We're going to need a medium-sized sort of rough, stipply kind of brush, a finer detail brush, and of course, a teeny-weeny, teeny-tiny brush for all of those teeny-tiny places. First step is to apply a black acrylic primer all over the model. So with this Kill Team set, they came in this nice green sort of plastic, but we'll start out with black for now, just because there's going to be a lot of recesses and such in the model. So we will start out with just grabbing some of this grey and using a nice fluffy brush, something like this. We're going to dry brush just over the model, kind of doing a bit of a pre-shade. I haven't stuck this onto the base just yet, so we're just going to do this heavy dry brush just for now, and then we'll go back over again with a sort of brighter grey, maybe even a white. Moving on to the next stage, I've got some of this white. I didn't really bother to rinse this brush out, just purely because with dry brushes, if you rinse them out, it will take a little bit of time just for them to properly fully dry. So it's not pure white, it's more like a very, very light grey, but that's fine really for what we're needing it for. And then we're just going to dry brush just again back over his little friend here and the rest of the marine, but not so heavy this time. It's going to be more of a lighter dry brush, and if it's a little bit sort of messy, it doesn't really matter, because that's going to add to a nice texture that we want to try for. So you can just go up and down as you normally do with the dry brushing, or you can stipple, and that's going to create some nice texture as well. So you can just have a little play around with. Because these plague marines are very kind of grimy and dirty, they're not exactly clean, you can have a little experiment with different ways that you can add texture with this kind of pre-shading method. So that's the pre-shading done for now, and because Nurgle is obviously the great and clean one, you can keep going, you can add in some more white, make it a little bit brighter, you can stipple the entire thing, just have a real nice experiment with it, because this kind of model and the aesthetic of them allows you to do so, which I think is really nice. So to try and get this right shade, and of course there's various different shades ranging from this kind of orc flesh kind of colour right up to a more kind of traditional like bone white, a bit like their 40k older Legion. So if you have an airbrush, this will be an absolute doddle. So you could just load up a nice kind of green into your airbrush, thin it down, and then just go to town. But we're going to pretend we don't have one. So we've got a nice medium-sized brush. I've just thinned this down, and we're just going to go over the armor panels, and hopefully with this pre-shading it will be brighter, obviously in the brighter areas, and then darker in the darker areas. If you've got something like contrast paint, this will work really, really well. So we're just going to go over the armor panels with this. And then once it's dry, we can then start to tackle the trims and some of the other areas. So we're going to focus on the armor for now, and then we'll go back over and do some of the more dirtier and grimier, more nurgly stuff. So after the first coat, this is how we're looking so far, and it's pretty good. So because we thinned down the paints, you can actually see the pre-shading up coming up underneath. Now, if you wanted it to be a little bit brighter, so it'll pop a little bit more, then what we could do is, again, just apply a thin layer, but make it a second layer, just going over the top. And so let's just kind of pick out, see that bit there. So yes, we could start just to build the colours up a little bit more. So we'll give a second layer a go. I haven't painted Death Guard before, and I don't think that I will, after this, dive straight in and start buying force of them. They're not my kind of thing. They creep me out. I've got to be honest, they do creep me out. But I can appreciate the level of detail that's gone into these. So it seems like that the designers behind the sculpts have really had a lot of fun doing them. And it does show. I mean, just like this little piece here, this like, I don't know, this tube coming out with like this pus sort of thing. Some of the other models that are built, there's just so many little details that you don't notice at first. But when you notice them, you go, haha, that's nice. Ooh, that's gross. Like all these, like, yeah, just loads full of detail. But again, you know, I can appreciate, that's fine. It's just, it's not for me. It's really not for me. So just going to go over with this second coat, just to make it a little bit more punchy. You could go over the entire thing, or you can do what I've done, which is just to go over like one side, just to show a little bit more shading, perhaps underneath. And yeah, we'll just have a nice little play around with. So after our two coats of the orc flesh is dried, it's looking pretty good so far. So I'm going to try something else now. I'm going to move up another shade. So I've got some of the Screaming Skull, just to brighten up our orc flesh. And I've got this medium-sized brush. Now this is, the bristles are quite hard on this one. So I want to try some stippling action with this. You could use a small piece of sponge, just with a pair of, what are they called? Pincers? You know what I mean. Pliers. No, not pliers. Anyway, you could use tiny sponge, just dab away, or you can use something like this. And again, just kind of removing the majority off our brush, similar to dry brushing. And I'm just going to just focus on the areas that is going to get the most light. And see how it turns out. So far, just on this leg here, it's kind of stipple. It will take a bit of time. You can see already, like, the texture that's coming up is really, really nice. So take your time with this. You wouldn't have to thin it down with water, I wouldn't have thought. But if you feel like it's getting a little bit claggy, then maybe just drop in a little bit of water. You don't want it too much, otherwise it's just going to slosh everywhere. So yes, we're going to roll with this. If you don't want to use this stippling method, then you can just use a more traditional just paint method. Just thin it down, add in a little bit of this Screaming Skull into your mixture, and just paint away as you would. But again, because of the aesthetic of the Death Guard, because it's very grimy, it's very rough and ready, you don't have to be as neat as you would do with a regular Space Marine. So it gives us a chance as hobbyists and painters to try out different methods that we wouldn't normally do, or methods that we might do on something like terrain, for instance. And it just that I do like about the Death Guard, the fact that you do have this bit too much there, this kind of creative freedom. If you do put a little bit too much on, like kind of there, you could leave it, and we can hopefully just kind of dull it down with a little bit of a wash later on, or you can just mix in some more of the previous paint, so some of the orc flesh, and then just kind of go into where it's darker, and then build it back up. But yeah, let's have a little play around with this, see how it looks. And of course, let's not forget about our little nurgling friend at the bottom. So we'll do pretty much mirror what we're doing with the Marine with these little guys. So I'm not really bothering with the stippling just because it's more like a texture for the armor itself, whereas this guy doesn't really have armor, so I'm just going to do just a nice little dry brushes over the top. Trying to use the same colours as best we can. I have noticed on the artwork that these guys tend to be a little bit paler. So what we'll do is that we will, as we build our colours up, I'm going to use some more of this just on the marine armour itself. But I might even use just a little bit of white just on this guy, just to make him brighter before we dull him down by using a couple of different washes. So now I'm using pure bleach bone. No, it used to be called bleach bone. Screaming Skull. And again, just using this kind of stippling method, and it's looking pretty good. So I'm just going to do a kind of rough highlight with it. So that's the greenish armour done for now, before we start to apply any washes. So what I'm going to do now is I've got some of this Retribution armour, so we're going to do the trim on the armour panels. We're going to make it relatively tidy, relatively neat, before we start to add any washes on. So we'll give it a nice base coat first. Sticking with the metallics, I've got some of this Iron Warriors Silver, and again we're just going to apply this all over the metal areas, all the metal works, his grenades, the bolt gun, the little bits of chainmail that he's got as well, the little kind of Under Armour areas, basically just anywhere where you think this should go, just slap it on. So, to make his armour really grimy and horrible and messy, we're going to need a selection of paint. So I've got some of this Agrax Earthshade, which is a nice brown wash. We have this Typhus Corrosion, and this stuff's really nice. So it's a mixture of paint. It's got almost sort of really fine sand or silt in it that creates this nice grainy texture when it's dried. Once they are dried, then we can apply some of this Rise of Rust over the top as a dry brush, and also some of this Nightlac Oxide, and that's a really nice it's a copper oxide, and that pairs great with the gold trim. So I'm going to pop this little guy to one side because it's not really needed. Maybe just over the grenades perhaps with this. So we're going to just take just a small brush for now, and we're just going to apply it just over the metal areas just to really kind of grind them up, make them look aged. And then we'll do the same thing, just going over the Marine himself. And then in a few locations we'll just kind of pop in some of this typhus corrosion. Now I'm not too sure whether I'm going to use it in sort of streaks or whether or not to get a sort of like a bit of a tide brush like the one that we use for the stippling. This one here, to kind of pop in just a couple of areas of the corrosion. So I'll have a play around with first, see how I feel. And again, this sort of stage, as long as you have these paints, or well, don't have to necessarily have all of them, as long as you have some of these, you can provide and create a really nice look for your Plague Marines. So I've gone over with the Agrax Earth Shade. I'm now going to use some of this Nihilic Oxide. So with this thin brush, I'm just going to pop in just a little bit just into this grill. You can thin it down with some water first just to help with the flow, but also it helps it not to look as vibrant when you first put it down. So you can have a little kind of a taste and a kind of feel of how it looks. I'm also just going to put it around the rivets of the gold trim. Now you can drop it onto just the odd one or two, but I quite like it when it's over every single rivet. And again, you can just thin it down with some water. Just see how it looks. And in fact, yeah, I'm just going to go over the entire trim with it. Just going to just eke it back in. A little bit there. And yeah, why not? Let's go over all of the gold trim with this. So moving on to the type of corrosion, I'm just going to use this little brush here and just going to pick out just a few areas, so maybe like inside these little craters. You can as well just do the odd little line to show, I don't know, some kind of like liquid rust that's kind of dripping down the way, that's causing this horrible grimy streak. So we can just kind of pop in maybe just a couple around the back there. So, moving on to our Rise of Rust. I've gone for my nice little stippy brush, and then we're just going to dry brush just over this grenade, just to show you how it looks. The less you put on, the kind of the subtler rusting effect that you'll get. But if you kind of really work your brush in, and then just kind of dab some bits on, you get nice, vibrant orange specks coming up. So kind of go over the grenades a little bit, over this pin. You just pick out anywhere really that like a little bit of rust to show. So I'm just gonna work my bristles in. There we go. Make it nice and orange, and then we're just going to just dab a little bit there. Exhaust vents. Just really just pick out any little places that you might like. So now that we're done with all the weathering and it's all dry, you can see how it's all come together. And it's created this really nice kind of just various different shades. I mean, you've got the blues from the oxide, you've got rust, you've got all of these little kind of pieces just coming together to make it really, really interesting. So I'm going to move on to these horns that are protruding out from the Marine's armour. So I'm going to want a medium-sized brush, and we're using some of this screen is gone. Really turn the lid around. There we go. I'm going to apply just a thin layer just over the top, and then what we'll do is that once it's dry, we can then start to dry brush a darker brown just on the top, and then probably finishing off with a much deeper brown, or even sort of black over the top. I have seen it with some of GW's heavy metal painters where they paint stripes down it as well. This you can do if you like, but I don't think I will this time. But it's something that you can do if you like. So I've mixed in a little bit of this Mornfang brown, and just using a fluffy brush, I've just used the same sort of stipply brush. It's going to just dry brush the tips. And then we'll just add in a little bit more and more of the Mornfang brown just to show the age, the kind of the wearing of the bones protruding outward from this poor marine shoulder. And then while we have the Mornfang brown, we're going to do the belts just across his torso here. So I'm going to grab a medium-sized brush, just going to thin it down a tad with some water, and then we're just going to gradually build our shades up. So now I'm going to move on to some of the more gross pustule areas as well. So I've got some of this moot green and also this Abaddon black. Before I move on to those areas, I'm just going to paint the lenses of his eyes. So I'm going to mix the two together, and I'm just going to cover all of them in this dark green. Again, while you have the dark green, we can just thin it down a tad, and then we can just run it over some of these. They don't have to all be green. I might do some sort of green, maybe some in a more sort of purplish colour, but for a base colour, I'm just going to start out with this green just for now. So I think I managed to get all the goo on the miniature covered. So it's going to add in a little bit more of this moot green into our mixture. I've just swapped out just for a smaller brush, and I'm just going to aim for the underside of the lenses, similar to how we do like normal marines. So I'm just going to kind of do the underside at a slight angle, and then towards the top, that's where we're going to add in just a tiny little white dot of like some kind of reflective lens. And I'm just going to now grab our white, mix that in as well, so we have a nice brighter green. And I'm just going to just pop in just a little bit at the bottom here, and there as well. And a little white dot, a greenish white dot towards the top. And then what you can do is that just rinse your brush out. It's got no other paint mixed in. Grab our white, and then just pop in just a tiny, tiny, teeny, tiny, tiny dot up at the top there. I'm trying to aim within a really pale green dot as well. There we go. Got a couple of little eyes there. So while we have this small brush and our kind of green mixtures, we can use the colours that we have here. I will do just to start out with. So I'm just going to just add in a couple of little blobs over here. You can add in yellows just to mix it up a little bit, rather than using white. So it's more of a natural, brighter green rather than a paler kind of white green. And then maybe later on we'll experiment around with using some different purples and bits and pieces like that. So for these bits down here, I'm just adding in more and more of yellow into our mixture. And again, just keep your paints nice and thin. It's the same kind of way that we did the armour. Let me just focus a little bit there. And with these bits, we're just going to work in smaller and smaller areas, trying to build it up so that the final brighter colour is right in the middle at the top of these gross growths. Honestly, it truly is disgusting. It doesn't have to be entirely smooth, because I imagine that these things would have texture, as gross as that sounds. And then with these bits, we can just add in just a little bit at the top. Just like that. So I'm just going to finish off these bits by just adding just a little bit of yellow just at the very tops, just in the center, and then that will give us a nice contrast, a nice kind of show of some kind of sickly glow coming from these wounds. You can do a similar thing as well with these smaller ones as well if you'd like. So if you're thinking of using purple instead, I'm going to start out with this Gene Stealer purple, and again just starting out with the paints just being thinned down with a little bit of water, although I do tend to find that most of the brighter purples in Games Workshop's range are quite thin anyway, so I don't think you need to. So I'm just going to start out just a little bit just there. I wonder if there's anywhere else I could probably paint a bit of purple. Maybe this loop is coming out of here. It's not really the best example because it's quite small, but yeah. Why not? And then once the first layer is dry, instead of adding in a white or sort of pink, I'm going to add in yellow instead. So take a little bit of yellow, mix it in. I'm just going to just add in. Same thing with the green, just add in a tiny bit, just kind of focusing, going small into the center of the protrusion. I want to call, I don't know, it's very gross. And as you build it up, just add in more and more of the yellow, because I tend to find that adding the yellow in with the purple is more of a, I don't know, kind of like a bruised, fleshy sort of colour. It just doesn't look right. I mean, in terms of you know, it looking fleshy, of course it looks right. Just add in just a little bit of there. You could add in a little bit of white as well if you like, which I might do. Gross. So our marine is pretty much finished, but before we continue, I'm just going to move over onto his little friend on his base. So I went over, just kind of picked out the little metal areas and all the grenades that are near his feet. So we could leave him like that, but I won't. So we're going to take some of this lovely Megos purple. So it's a nice contrast paint. If you don't have access to this, then you can use a mid-tone purple and just thin it down with some water. But I'm going to thin this contrast down even further, as I just like more of a hint of purple. I'm just going to just apply this just all over him. It does look like it's too purple. And what you can always do is just rinse your brush off, still keep it wet, and then just use the brush just to move the quantity of contrast paint that's already on the miniature around, rather than getting a paper towel or what have you to try and remove it. You can just use the brush just to move around the paint that we already have. Cool, so he's done for now. We're just going to leave that to dry. For his teeth and his eyes, we could maybe do something with that as well. But for the base, there's a few little details on here. So there's like some goo coming out of one of the grenades. I don't want to ask what the hell is in these grenades. I thought it was just going to be explosives, but knowing Nurgle, it's something utterly repulsive. So I'm going to pick these out with a combination of some greens and also purples, like we did on the Marine's legs. And yes, I'll be back once it's done. And so here we are at the end of the video. So this is how I painted a Plague Marine, and it's the first one I've done. And you know what? It has been really, really fun. It's been very, very interesting. The fact that there's loads of different textures and interesting yet quite gross stuff going on, it means you can really play around with and experiment. And I can see why people that collect Death Guard have a lot of fun painting them, because they're really interesting. You don't have to be as neat and careful and as tidy as you would do with an equivalent Space Marine. You can try new things, you can try different textures, you can be a little bit risky with how you go about painting them, and do you know what? It has been very, very refreshing to paint this, I must say. So if you paint Death Guard and you're watching this, let me know down in the comments. Do you like the way I've painted it? Is there any suggestions you might offer? If you're new, hello and welcome, and thanks for watching all the way to the end. You know where that subscribe button is, it's just down there. Just give it a little click, and that'll help a lot with my small channel to grow even slightly bigger. That'll be fantastic. If you want to pick up some Plague Marines for yourselves or any other disgusting Nurgle models, then look no further than Wayland Games. There's a affiliate link for them down in the description below. If you click there and put in an order, a little bit goes towards in supporting me and the channel. So thank you ever so much if you do click down there. And there's going to be some stills and some reels of this miniature over at my Instagram page at Lynch Paints. If you want to check me out over there as well, that'd be very, very kind. And if you want to support me just that a little bit more, and you're feeling particularly generous, then I do have a super thanks button down below. If you want to just click that and just chuck me a couple of quid, enough for, I don't know, like a pot of paint or a coffee, anything you can spare would be just so appreciated and so lovely of you if you do. So it's there if you want. You don't have to click it, but it's there. So thank you ever so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. It is absolutely muchly appreciated. I'm using that word appreciate quite a lot. So anyway, thank you ever so much. Stay safe, stay beautiful, and we'll see you all next time.